The message that finally proved I wasn't paranoid had been sitting in our shared cloud backup for 5 years. He just forgot I'd once paid for the storage. I was 36 years old the day I found it. I want to tell you how I got there, because the finding wasn't the important part. The years before it were. My name is Elena. I worked from home, writing copy for a marketing firm that changed its name twice in 6 years and never once gave me a raise worth mentioning. Daniel worked in commercial real estate. He shook hands well. He remembered names, birthdays, the small details that make people feel chosen. He also had this habit, whenever he told a story at a party, of pausing right before the punchline and looking around the table first, making sure every face was already leaning in. He never delivered a line to just one person. He delivered it to a room. When we married, I had a small independent income and a car with my name alone on the title. Within 2 years, both were gone, not stolen, just gradually reasoned away, one calm sentence at a time. It's more practical if I handle the accounts, he said, the year we filed our first joint tax return. You're better with words, I'm better with numbers. It made a certain kind of sense that year. It was only later, looking back across all the years stacked together, that the sense stopped adding up to anything. The isolation happened the same slow way. It's exhausting, driving separately to the same dinner, he'd say, so we'd take his car, and somewhere along the way my car got sold, without ceremony, practically. And I stopped noticing I couldn't leave a room without him until the thought of trying felt strange even to have. My college roommate stopped calling around year 3. I told myself we'd simply drifted. I didn't ask myself why every visit from her had somehow ended in an argument between Daniel and me afterward, always about something small, always leaving me too tired to schedule the next one. I want to tell you about 3 nights, because they explain everything that came after better than any summary could. The first was a dinner with our friends Marcus and Priya, at a small Italian place with candles stuck into old wine bottles. Daniel's phone buzzed twice during the appetizers. He turned it face down without looking. It buzzed again during the entrees. This time he glanced at it. Something in his face eased into a small private smile before he set it back down. "Who texted you so late?" I asked. My voice was light, almost bored. I wasn't accusing him of anything. I was curious the way you're curious about a knock at the door. He laughed before he answered. He always laughed first, a signal that the room should get ready to agree with him. "See," he said, turning to Marcus and Priya like they were a jury he'd already won. "This is what I live with. She watches every notification like she's FBI." Priya laughed too, a beat too quickly. Marcus said, "You're overthinking it, Elena," in the gentle voice people use when they think kindness and dismissal are the same thing. I felt heat climb my neck. I apologized. I don't remember what for. I only remember the shape of the apology leaving my mouth before I'd decided to make it. The second night came 4 months later. I was going through the bank statement, the way I still did sometimes. There was a charge from a restaurant downtown, a place called Faro, $211, dated a Tuesday I remembered clearly because I'd had a head cold that whole week. I asked him about it over coffee the next morning. "You forgot," he said, before I'd even finished the sentence. "We ate there in March. You had the branzino. You said it was too salty." I hadn't eaten branzino in over a year. I knew that the way you know your own address. But he said it so simply, so certainly, that within 5 minutes I was the one softening. "Maybe I did forget," I said. "My memory's been terrible lately." He nodded like a doctor confirming something he'd suspected all along. "It has been," he agreed. "You should probably get more sleep." I want you to notice something in that exchange. I wasn't confused before that conversation. I became slightly less sure of myself during it, in exactly the span of those 5 minutes. That's the whole mechanism. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in exactly that many minutes, over and over, for years, until the sureness is gone and you no longer remember when it left. The third night was at his parents' house, a barbecue for no particular occasion. His sister Rachel pulled me aside near the drink cooler and asked if I was okay. "You seem tense lately," she said. She always asked questions like that with her sleeves pushed up past her elbows, like she was already halfway to fixing whatever the answer turned out to be. I think she meant it. I think of everyone in that family, she was the closest to seeing something true. Before I could answer, Daniel appeared with 2 beers and answered for me. She invents stories in her head sometimes, he said, handing Rachel a beer like the sentence weighed nothing. I've been trying to get her to trust reality instead of her imagination. Rachel nodded slowly. Everyone nearby nodded slowly too, the way a room nods when it wants the calm version of events instead of the complicated one. Not at me. At him. I smiled, because smiling was the only response left that wouldn't prove his point for him. There was a gesture he made every time I questioned anything. He would tap his wedding ring twice with his thumb and say, "Trust is a choice." For years, I let that sentence settle something in me. I told myself a marriage was built on choosing to believe the person you loved. I mistook that idea for wisdom instead of what it actually was. There was a version of the barbecue I used to tell myself afterward, driving home, where I'd said something different, where I'd corrected him in front of everyone instead of smiling. I rehearsed that version for years without ever using it. It stayed in the car with me unspoken, every single time. Later that same barbecue, his father pulled me aside near the grill and told me, unprompted, how proud he was of the two of us. 11 years, he said, shaking his head like the number itself was an achievement. Not everyone makes it this far anymore. I thanked him. I remember standing there holding a paper plate, calculating, without meaning to, how many of those 11 years I could actually account for clearly in my own memory, and coming up with a number that frightened me. There was a fourth night I didn't understand as part of the pattern until much later. We were at a work function. One of his and a colleague of his asked me what I did for a living. Before I answered, Daniel said, "Oh, she does a little freelance thing, keeps her busy," and moved the conversation forward like my job was a hobby he was being generous about. I opened my mouth to correct him. I closed it again. Later, in the car, I told him that had bothered me. He said, "I was just being brief. We were in a hurry. Why are you making this into something?" By the time we got home, I was the one apologizing for making it into something. I'm telling you all this so you understand what kind of ordinary afternoon it was when everything changed. There was no fight that day. I was cleaning out our shared cloud storage because it had hit its limit again. I went looking for old files to delete. Instead, I found an old messaging backup, one that had synced automatically 5 years earlier, before he'd taken over that account too. Thousands of archived conversations sat inside it. Most of them meant nothing. One conversation had no name attached, just a phone number I didn't recognize, sitting at the bottom of the list. I almost skipped it. I don't know why I didn't. 5 years of messages opened in front of me. Photos I wasn't in. Hotel reservations under names that weren't ours. Voice notes I didn't play at first and then did. Plans for a weekend in April I remembered him calling a work conference. Jokes traded back and forth about how easy I was to manage. There was a whole thread from the week of my birthday 2 years earlier, the year he'd told me a work emergency kept him from coming to my sister's dinner. In it, he complained about having to sit through the emergency he'd invented. He called it exhausting, keeping track of which excuse he'd used with which person. She sent back a laughing emoji. She told him he deserved a real vacation from all of it. I sat with that message longer than any of the others. It wasn't the affair itself that hollowed me out. It was the casualness. The way my birthday dinner had been, to him, simply an inconvenient detail in someone else's week. One message stopped me completely. She questioned the hotel again today, it read. I told her she was imagining things. Worked like always. A timestamp. A date. A location. It matched a night I remembered with total clarity, a night I had doubted myself out of for 3 straight years, a night I had apologized to him for doubting. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him. I closed the laptop very gently, the way you close a door on a room you don't want to wake anyone in. And I knew. Not suspected. Knew, the plain flat way you know your own name. I didn't tell him that night. I made dinner. I asked about his day. He told me about a difficult client, and I nodded in the right places. I went to bed at my usual time, lying in the dark with my eyes open. Something had already shifted, but it wasn't rage, not yet. It was quiet. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like sharing it with him. I didn't cry that week either. I kept expecting the grief to arrive all at once, the way it does in movies. Instead, what came was a strange, clean stillness, like the air after a storm has already moved somewhere else. I cooked the same meals. I answered his questions. Underneath all of it, a second life had already started without my permission, the way a seed starts before it ever breaks the surface of the soil. The next week, I called an old colleague, a woman named Priscilla, who had left our firm 2 years earlier for something bigger. She used to end every phone call the same way, no matter what we'd been talking about, by saying, "All right, go be brilliant," and hanging up before you could answer. I told her I was ready for something more. She said, "Thank God," before I'd even finished the sentence. Priscilla took me to lunch that same week at a diner with red vinyl booths near her office. She asked how things were at home, carefully, the way you ask a question you already suspect the answer to. I told her things were fine. She looked at me a long moment and said, "You know you don't have to perform fine for me," then changed the subject herself, ordering us both a slice of the same lemon pie she'd been getting there since her first week on the job, whether I wanted it or not. I hadn't told her anything yet. She just left the door open and let me choose whether to walk through it. Within 3 weeks, there were 2 interviews. By the end of the month, there was an offer, a director position, a salary almost double what I'd been quietly earning. I signed the contract at a coffee shop 2 blocks from our apartment, alone, on a Thursday. Daniel had no idea any of this was happening. He asked that evening what I'd done with my day. I told him I'd gone for a walk. I found a lawyer the same way I'd found the job, by asking someone I trusted instead of someone he'd have approved of. Her name was Marisol Vega. Her office sat above a dry cleaner's, small and warm, with a kettle in the corner she used constantly. The first time I sat across from her, she poured 2 cups of cinnamon tea before I'd said a word. "People think better when they're warm," she said, sliding a cup toward me. I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she didn't gasp or reach for my hand. She simply opened a folder and started writing. "Facts don't need volume," she told me later, when I asked why she stayed so calm through every detail that made my own voice shake. I have never forgotten that sentence. Over the weeks that followed, I built a case the way you build a house you plan to actually live in. I copied financial records onto a drive Marisol kept locked in a cabinet. I saved the cloud archive before he could think to delete it. I gathered property documents from a folder in the hall closet he never opened. Marisol explained each step without drama, the way you'd give directions to someone simply going somewhere, not fleeing. Some evenings I sat in my car in the parking garage near the new office, just to have 20 minutes where nobody could ask what I was doing with my time. I'd go through the folder Marisol had given me, checking off small tasks one at a time, bank statement copied, lease reviewed, employment letter filed. None of it felt like courage while I was doing it. It felt like paperwork. I understand now that the paperwork was the courage. It was just spread thin enough, across enough evenings, that it never had to announce itself as anything dramatic. I signed a lease on a small apartment across town, 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen, nothing special except that every wall inside it would belong to nobody but me. I moved things a little at a time, during lunch breaks, a box of books here, a box of winter clothes there. He never noticed. By then he'd stopped looking at me closely enough to notice much. There was a moment in Marisol's office, going over the timeline of financial records, when she paused and looked at me over her cup. "You don't have to convince me," she said. I hadn't realized I'd been explaining myself again, laying out reasons the way I used to at home, as if someone might object if I didn't defend the decision in advance. I stopped. We kept working. I understood, sitting there, how deep a habit like that can root itself without you ever choosing it. I noticed it again at the new job, my second week, when someone asked why I'd structured a proposal a certain way. The old apology rose in my throat before the question had even finished. I caught it that time. I explained the reasoning plainly, the way you'd explain anything true, and the room moved on without needing more from me. It was such a small thing. It didn't feel small. I spent my first night in the new apartment before I'd even told him it existed, just to see what it felt like. I hadn't moved the furniture in yet, only a few boxes and a folding chair. I sat on the floor eating takeout out of the container. The stillness in that room was nothing like the stillness at home. At home, quiet meant waiting to see what mood would come through the door next. Here, it simply meant nobody was coming through any door at all. What he did eventually notice was how still I'd become. "You're awfully calm lately," he said one evening, watching me over his laptop screen. I told him I was just tired. A week later, sharper. "You're not checking my phone anymore." I told him I trusted him. The words came out smooth. Something flickered behind his eyes. For years my distrust had been his proof of innocence. Now it was gone, and he didn't know what to stand on instead. He tried mentioning an old argument, almost fondly, waiting for me to pick it back up. I only nodded and changed the subject. I watched him notice that too. "Everything okay?" he asked, more than once, in the weeks that followed. I said yes, every time, and every time it was true in a way he couldn't understand. Everything was already finished. The new job started. The apartment furnished. The divorce paperwork waiting at Marisol's office. A separate account, funded slowly, invisible until it wouldn't matter what he saw. There was one evening, close to the end, when he tried something new. He set down his fork and said, quietly, "I know I haven't always made things easy for you. I've been thinking about that. I want us to be better." I asked him what better looked like to him. He said, "I don't know, more like we used to be." He couldn't name a single specific thing. Just the general shape of an earlier version of us, one he'd apparently decided was worth returning to, now that I'd stopped fighting for it. I watched his face while he spoke. I waited to feel something soften, the way it always used to when he offered an apology shaped exactly like that one. Nothing softened. I realized I was simply curious about him now, the way you're curious about weather in a city you no longer live in. His parents planned a 40th anniversary dinner in early autumn, 20 guests or more, spread across their backyard under strings of white lights. I almost didn't go. Then I decided I would, because I had one more thing to bring with me, and it deserved an audience that had spent years believing him. I remember Marisol's exact words when I told her I wanted to bring the binder to the dinner myself, in person, instead of having it delivered through the process the ordinary way. She didn't try to talk me out of it. She only asked, "Are you doing this for them, or for you?" I told her I honestly didn't know yet. She said, "Find out before Saturday," and printed the copies anyway. Near the end of the meal, he stood, tapping his glass with a fork. He talked about commitment. About the example his parents had set. About how lucky he felt to have found someone who understood that love isn't grand gestures, it's quiet daily trust. He looked at me while he said it. He tapped his wedding ring twice with his thumb. He smiled. "Trust is always a choice," he said. I stood up. I reached into the bag beside my chair. I set a printed binder down beside his plate, next to the wine glass he'd just raised. "You're right," I said. "That's why I stopped choosing yours." The backyard went quiet. His mother reached for the binder first, out of habit more than suspicion. She opened to the first page. A timeline. 5 years, printed in Marisol's careful formatting. She turned the page. Messages. Photographs. A hotel confirmation with a name on it that had never once been mine. Her face changed. She stopped smiling somewhere around the 3rd page. She did not start again. Rachel leaned over her mother's shoulder. She read in silence. Then she said, quietly, almost to herself, "These dates match." Trent, one of Daniel's coworkers, went still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "That's our conference trip," he said, to no one in particular. He set the fork down without finishing the thought. Another guest asked the question, forming behind every face at the table at once. "Wait, you told everyone your wife imagined all this?" Daniel reached for the binder like he could close it fast enough to undo what had already been read. "You're taking this out of context," he said, his voice climbing toward the register he'd always used to win arguments. "Read page 32, I said. Nobody argued with me. Nobody rushed to comfort him either. His sister sat down slowly, the binder still open, and did not look up again for a long time. His mother didn't speak to him for the rest of the night, not even when he tried, twice, to catch her eye. His father stood at the head of the table. This was the same man who'd told me 11 years was an achievement. Now he stared down at the photographs like he was trying to make them rearrange themselves into something else. Someone's chair scraped back. Someone else picked up a wine glass and set it down again without drinking from it. He kept reaching for the version of events where I was the unstable one. There was nothing left in that backyard willing to hold that version up for him anymore. I left before dessert. Nobody stopped me at the gate. The divorce moved quickly after that because there was nothing left to argue about. The evidence didn't need interpretation. It only needed to be read, and by then, everyone who mattered already had. I kept the new job. I moved into the apartment with the narrow kitchen, and slowly it stopped feeling temporary, the way a coat starts to feel like yours only after you've worn it through a full season. I reached out to friends I hadn't spoken to properly in years, people Daniel had eased out of our lives so gradually I'd never noticed the doors closing. Priya called back within a day. Marcus took longer, but he called too and apologized for a dinner neither of us needed to name out loud. The new job turned out to be harder than I expected in a way that had nothing to do with the work itself. In my first performance review, my manager told me my instincts were sharp and asked why I hedged every recommendation with 3 qualifiers before I'd let myself state it plainly. I didn't have a good answer for her that day. I thought about it on the drive home. Somewhere around a red light, I understood something. I'd spent 11 years building sentences that could survive being picked apart before anyone had even started picking. It took months to unlearn. Some days I still catch myself starting a sentence with "I could be wrong," but before I've even said the thing I'm not actually unsure about at all. There were smaller moments too, the kind nobody tells you to expect. Standing in a grocery aisle, realizing I could buy whichever brand I wanted without an opinion waiting for me at home. Painting one wall of the apartment a deep, unnecessary blue on a Saturday, just because I liked the color. Falling asleep some nights with the lamp still on, because I could. Rachel called in the spring. "I keep thinking about that night," she said. About all the nights before it, actually. I didn't see it. I told her I didn't blame her. We talked for almost an hour. Near the end, she asked if we could get coffee sometime, just the two of us, no family occasion attached. We did, 2 weeks later, at a small place near her apartment. She ordered for both of us without asking, the same 2 drinks we used to get in college. It felt like she'd been saving that detail for exactly this reunion. It was easier than most conversations I'd had with her in years. Marisol and I had one last meeting after the paperwork finally closed, mostly to sign a final document and clear out the file. She poured the tea one more time, out of habit more than necessity. "You did the hard part yourself," she told me. "All I did was organize what you already knew." It took me longer than that afternoon to fully believe her. The binder on the table had only ever been paper. The real work had been the slow months before it, believing myself again, one decision at a time, long before anyone in that backyard had to. Months later, I saw Daniel in a grocery store on a Sunday afternoon. He looked thinner, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. He started walking toward me. Then he noticed I was smiling, not at him, at nothing to do with him at all, just at the plain relief of choosing my own cereal without asking anyone's permission first. "You never gave us another chance," he said quietly, once he was close enough. I looked once at his hand, at the ring still on his finger. I didn't need to hear the tap this time. I could hear it anyway, in memory. Trust was a choice, I said. So was lying. I walked away. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me left that I needed to see. The greatest revenge was never that binder on the table, or the silence that followed it, or the look on his mother's face. It was refusing to spend one more day of my life asking whether my own memories were real. If you've ever had someone convince you that your own eyes were lying to you, tell me in the comments how you found your way back to trusting yourself. And if this story meant something to you, hit like and subscribe, because there are more stories exactly like this one still waiting to be told.